The wind outside the music hall blew cold that morning, carrying the smell of the city and the sound of buses rushing by. Inside, the grand building felt like another world. The halls were wide, shiny, and filled with echoing footsteps. Every corner seemed to hold a memory of a song or a performance from years past. And somewhere in the back, sweeping the floor with slow, careful strokes, was a young man named Evan. He moved quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone. He had learned early that people noticed him only when they needed someone to blame for a mess, or someone to shout at. So he stayed small, stayed silent, and worked. He didn't come from privilege like most of the people who walked through the doors of that place. His clothes were simple, his shoes were worn down, and he was always careful with every step. The music hall was preparing for a big event. A famous orchestra had arrived that week, and there was constant activity, musicians carrying cases, assistants running directions, and the conductor barking commands. Evan had been assigned to the backstage area and rehearsal rooms, sweeping floors, wiping down chairs, and making sure the stage stayed clean. He didn't mind the work. In fact, this place was the closest he had ever been to something he loved. Deeply music, especially piano. Ever since he was a child, he had been fascinated by it. He could remember standing outside small music shops, pressing his ear against the glass just to hear someone play inside. But his family never had money for lessons, and even buying a cheap keyboard was impossible. So he learned in pieces. A melody here, another tune there. He listened, memorized the sound, and repeated it in his head over and over again at night, until he could almost feel the keys beneath his fingers. He knew it wasn't real playing, but it kept the music alive inside him. That morning, after finishing his cleaning rounds, he passed by the rehearsal hall. The door was slightly open. He tried to walk past without looking, but the sound of a piano pulled him in like a hand grabbing his shirt. The pianist inside was practicing a fast, complicated piece. To Evan, it felt like watching someone paint the sky. He stood there for a moment, hidden behind the doorframe, listening with his heart beating faster. He closed his eyes for a second, letting the notes sink into him. Every change in rhythm, every small pause, every soft and sharp key. He kept them in his mind the way he always did. Before he could listen longer, footsteps echoed from behind. He quickly moved away from the door, pretending to wipe a nearby shelf. A group of orchestra members passed him, talking loudly, not even noticing him. Evan sighed softly. This was his reality, always on the edge of the music he loved, but never allowed to touch it. Hours later, after the musicians finished practice and left for lunch, the hall became quiet. Evan went back to the stage area to clean up. There, sitting under a beam of warm light, was the grand piano. It looked like a treasure, smooth, polished, perfect. He stared at it for a long moment. He shouldn't. He knew he shouldn't. But he felt something pull him forward. Not greed, not boldness, just longing. A quiet, aching longing. He looked around. No one was there. No conductor, no musicians, no staff. The hall was empty. His footsteps were soft as he walked toward the piano. His heart pounded, not out of fear but excitement. He reached out slowly, the way someone might reach for something sacred. And when his fingertips touched the keys, a shiver ran through him. He pressed one key gently, just one. The note rang through the empty hall, clean and warm. It was more beautiful than he imagined. He pressed another key, then another. He wasn't playing anything real, just feeling the sounds. Then, without meaning to, he began to mimic a melody he had heard earlier that morning. He played it slowly, not perfectly, but with deep focus. For a moment, it felt like he belonged there. He didn't hear the footsteps. He didn't hear the stage door open sharply. All he heard was the music he was finally allowed to make. Then, a voice cut through the air like a whip. "Don't touch my piano, broke guy." Evan froze. He looked up, and the conductor stood there tall, angry, eyes sharp with judgment. A few musicians had entered behind him and were staring as well. "What do you think you're doing?" the conductor demanded, walking forward. "This piano costs more than anything you'll ever own. Who gave you permission to touch it?" Evan tried to speak. "I'm sorry. I was just what?" The conductor snapped. "Trying to break it? Trying to pretend you're a musician?" A few musicians laughed quietly. Another one shook his head like he was watching something pathetic. Evan stepped back from the piano, his hands trembling. He felt his throat tighten, his face grow warm. He wished he could disappear right there in that moment. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble," Evan said softly. "I was just cleaning and cleaning," the conductor mocked. "It didn't look like cleaning to me. Stick to your job. And keep your hands off the instruments." Evan swallowed hard and nodded. He didn't look at anyone. He couldn't. The conductor waved him away like he was shooing a stray dog. "Go, now." Evan turned and walked as fast as he could without running. He heard more chuckles behind him. He didn't cry. He refused to cry, but something inside him tightened, so painfully that it almost felt like breaking. He reached the hallway and leaned against the wall for a moment, breathing slowly. He could still feel the piano keys on his fingers. For a brief moment, he had felt alive. But the humiliation now washed over him like cold water. He wondered why he even tried. Why he allowed himself that small moment of hope. As he walked toward the supply room to pick up his cleaning cart, someone stepped out from behind a stack of folded curtains. It was the older stage technician, a quiet man who had worked in the hall for decades. "You all right?" the technician asked gently. Evan forced a small smile. "Yeah, just stupid mistake." The technician shook his head. "You didn't make a mistake. He was just harsh, like always." Evan shrugged. "Doesn't matter. He's right. I shouldn't touch things that aren't mine." The technician looked at him for a long moment, his eyes thoughtful. "You know, I've heard. You hum tunes while working. You've got good ears. Better than some of the people who get paid to be here." Evan gave a tiny laugh. "I don't know about that." "I do," the man said firmly. "Don't let today make you think less of yourself." Evan nodded, appreciating the kindness even if it didn't erase the sting. The rest of the day passed. Slowly, he worked quietly, kept to himself, and avoided the rehearsal rooms. He didn't want to risk being seen by anyone from the orchestra. But even while he swept floors and emptied trash bins, his mind replayed the moment he touched the piano, the way the keys felt, the way the sound filled the room, the way he felt whole, even for just a minute. When evening came, the halls emptied out again. Light from the street lamps slipped through the tall windows. Evan gathered his tools and prepared to leave. But before stepping outside, he turned and looked back toward the stage. The piano was hidden in the dark from where he stood, but he could still sense it there. Maybe one day, he thought. Maybe one day I won't have to hide. He walked out of the building, the cold wind touching his face again. He zipped up his jacket, took a breath, and headed home. The city noise surrounded him, but he barely heard it. All he could think about was music he still believed belonged somewhere inside him. He didn't know yet that life was quietly preparing something for him, something surprising, something he never dared to imagine. But for now, he walked, alone, holding on to the memory of a single note he had played that morning, a note that, unknowingly, would become the beginning of everything. The wind was softer the next morning, and the sun warmed the outside of the music hall, but Evan felt none of it. He walked through the familiar tall doors with the same worn backpack slung over his shoulder. His steps were slow, and his mind replayed the events from the day before. No matter how much he tried to push the memory away, he kept hearing the conductor's voice echoing in his head. He went straight to the supply room, changed into his work apron, and grabbed the mop and cleaning cart. His hands still trembled slightly, but he kept moving. He needed the job. He needed the routine. He tried reminding himself that this place wasn't meant for him anyway, that he was only here to work. Not dream. But dreams don't disappear just because someone shouts at them. The hallways were unusually busy that morning. Boxes of equipment were being unloaded, lights were being tested, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry for the big performance week. Evan kept his head down as he swept around them. A few musicians passed him without glancing his way, talking excitedly about the upcoming concert, the audience, and the critics. To them, this was pressure. To Evan, it was a world he admired from the outside. He made his way backstage, where the older technician from yesterday was working with cables. The man looked up, saw Evan, and gave him a small nod. "You look tired," the technician said. "I didn't sleep much," Evan admitted. "Thinking about yesterday?" Evan shrugged, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. "I shouldn't have touched the piano. It's fine." The technician wiped his hands on a cloth and leaned against a crate. "You know, people like him forget that talent can come from anywhere. You don't need permission to have a gift." Evan smiled weakly. "Maybe, but I don't think he'll let me near that piano again." "You don't need him for that," the man said. "If you want to practice, come here late at night, after everyone leaves. I lock up most days. I can give you a little extra time before I shut the lights off." Evan blinked, surprised. "Are you serious?" The technician nodded. "As long as you're careful, and as long as you don't tell anyone." A tiny spark lit in Evan's chest. He tried not to show how much it meant to him, but he couldn't hide the small smile that escaped. "Thank you," he said softly. "Just don't make me regret it," the man said with a half-dash smile. The day continued like normal. Evan cleaned rehearsal rooms, dusted chairs, and pushed carts up and down corridors. But something felt lighter inside him. Even if it was just for a few minutes at the end of the day, he would get to touch the piano again. Not because he was sneaking around, but because someone believed he deserved the chance. When he passed the rehearsal hall, he stopped outside the slightly open door again. Today, the pianist was practicing slower pieces, soft, emotional melodies that floated gently in the air. Evan listened for a moment, then continued his work. He didn't want to risk the conductor noticing him. Around noon, he returned backstage to drop off collected trash bags. That's when he heard raised voices. No, that timing is completely off." The conductor barked. Evan froze for a second, then slowly peeked around the corner. The orchestra was rehearsing again, and the conductor's temper was worse than usual. He slammed the baton against his stand repeatedly, frustrated. The pianist looked tense, his fingers stiff. "It's simple," the conductor shouted. "Feel the music. Don't just hit the notes." The pianist tried again, but the moment he made a small mistake, the conductor threw his hands up. "Enough. Take a break. I need air before I lose my mind." The musicians sighed with relief as the conductor stormed out. Evan quickly stepped back so he wouldn't be seen. The pianist sat alone on the bench, rubbing his forehead. "You okay?" Someone asked him. "No. I've practiced this piece for weeks, but he expects perfection. Every time I try harder, I mess up more." Evan hesitated. He wanted to walk away, but part of him understood that feeling more than anyone there. Wanting to be good. Wanting someone to understand. But he left quietly. He knew better than to step into their world. The afternoon passed slowly. Evan finished his tasks and waited for night. Every tick of the clock felt a little too long. He could almost hear the piano waiting for him. When the last group of musicians packed their instruments and walked out, Evan began sweeping the stage. One by one, the lights dimmed until only the warm stage lamps remained. The technician appeared beside him, holding a keyring. "You still want to practice?" he asked. Evan nodded immediately. The man gave a gentle smile. "All right. I'll be finishing some work in the back. You get 30 minutes before I lock everything. Make them count." Evan walked toward the piano with slow, careful steps. The hall was silent now, the kind of silence that felt alive. The grand piano sat there, patient and waiting. He pulled out the bench and sat down. The smooth surface of the keys looked like something from a dream. He placed his hands on them and took a breath, and then he began to play, not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly. His fingers moved softly, following the melodies he had memorized just from listening. At first, he played a familiar tune he had heard 1,000 times through rehearsal room doors. Then he drifted into his own. Pattern notes he felt rather than knew. The music sounded soft, almost fragile, but it grew stronger with each second. The empty hall carried every sound beautifully. It was like the piano had been waiting for someone to play it with heart instead of pressure. Evan played with his eyes closed for a moment. Without meaning to, his face softened. His shoulders relaxed. For the first time, he felt truly free. When he finished the piece, he sighed and opened his eyes. He wasn't aware that someone had been watching. Up in the shadows of the backstage stairway, the technician leaned against the railing, arms crossed. He hadn't wanted to interrupt. He had slipped in quietly after finishing his work, drawn by the sound. He didn't speak yet. He let Evan continue. Evan tried a new melody, something he had created in his head over the years, but never had the courage to play. It started slow and unsure, but soon it became brighter, stronger. His fingers moved faster, following the rhythm he felt in his chest. The technician listened, stunned. He had expected talent, yes, but not this. Not something that felt like it came from deep inside the boy. Not something this pure. When Evan finally stopped, he let his hands rest in his lap. He didn't turn because he didn't know anyone was. There, that was beautiful, the technician finally said. Evan startled and quickly stood up. I'm sorry. I didn't know you were listening." "Don't apologize for playing well," the man said. "You've got something special." Evan shook his head shyly. "I just play what I hear. It's nothing professional." "Professional?" The man scoffed. "I've worked around musicians for 30 years. I know real talent when I hear it." Evan looked at the piano again, unsure of what to say. "You should practice more," the technician continued. "Come back tomorrow night, too." Evan felt a warmth in his chest. "Are you sure?" "As long as you don't tell anyone. Especially not him." The mention of the conductor made Evan's stomach twist again. "I won't say anything," he promised. The technician gave him a pat on the shoulder. "Good. Now go home and get some sleep. You've earned it." Evan nodded, packed his things, and headed outside. The night air was cool, but something inside him felt warm. He looked up at the sky, a small smile appearing on his face. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope. Real hope. He didn't know where this path would lead. He didn't know if the world would ever hear him play. But tonight, he had taken one small step towards something that felt right. And tomorrow night, he would take another. The next morning, the music hall felt busier than usual. People rushed through the doors with folders in hand, instruments on their backs, and stressed expressions on their faces. Posters for the upcoming concert had been put up everywhere, showing elegant fonts and glowing lights. Even the air seemed heavier with anticipation. Evan arrived early, as he always did. He kept his head down and went straight to the supply room. But even as he filled his cleaning cart, his mind drifted back to the piano from the night before. He could still feel the keys under his fingertips, still hear the sound echoing in the empty hall. He wished he could stay in that moment forever, but reality always returned. He started his cleaning shift, sweeping long hallways and tidying rehearsal rooms. The orchestra began arriving one by one, filling the building with the sounds of tuning instruments. Evan tried not to get in anyone's way. He kept his distance, though every part of him wanted to stop and listen. As he walked past one of the side rehearsal rooms, he heard the orchestra's pianist practicing. But something sounded off. Evan paused for a moment, sweeping slowly as he listened carefully. The pianist played the piece with correct notes, but something felt tense, like the music was fighting itself. Sometimes the tempo fell apart for a second before the pianist corrected it. Inside the room, the pianist took a deep breath and muttered, "Why can't I get this right today?" Evan quickly moved on. He hated the idea of being caught listening again. Later that morning, the conductor rushed into the hallway with his usual sharp footsteps. His face was tight with frustration. He waved his baton in the air as he talked to an assistant. "I don't care what it takes. We need that last rehearsal perfect. No mistakes. Not one." The assistant nodded nervously. "Yes, sir. I'll tell the pianist to rest before the run-through." "Good," the conductor said, adjusting his coat. "Today is the day we decide if this concert will be remembered or forgotten." Evan lowered his eyes as the conductor passed by. He hoped the man wouldn't recognize him from the day before. Thankfully, the conductor was too absorbed in his own thoughts to notice. Hours passed with constant activity. Boxes moved, workers ran back and forth, and musicians filled the hallways with short bursts of music. Evan tried to keep up, cleaning one room after another. But behind it all, something heavy hung in the air. There was pressure. There was fear of failure. And it made everyone sharp and tired. Around noon, Evan walked backstage to prepare the stage area. He expected to find a quiet space, but instead he found the orchestra gathered there, talking in tense whispers. "What's happening?" someone asked. The pianist got a call. Something urgent at home. He had to leave. Another whispered, "Leave? Now? Before the full rehearsal?" He said he'll try to get back, but doesn't know how long it'll take. Evan stopped in his tracks. He listened from the shadow beside the curtain, not daring to be seen. The conductor stood in the middle of the group, rubbing his temples. "This is unbelievable. We can't rehearse without the piano. The whole piece depends on it." "We can practice the other sections," one musician suggested. "No," the conductor nearly shouted. "That won't help. Without the piano, we can't coordinate timing. The entire structure falls apart. We might as well cancel rehearsal." A heavy silence followed. Someone tried again. "Maybe we can call in a substitute?" "The only available substitutes are hours away," the conductor snapped. "We don't have hours." Evan felt the tension rise. His fingers curled slightly around the handle of his broom. The technician from last night appeared behind the group. "Calm down," he said gently. "We'll think of something." "Think faster," the conductor said. "We're running out of time." The technician glanced around, then his eyes found Evan in the shadows. Evan felt his stomach drop. The older man walked over to him quietly. "You heard?" he asked softly. Evan nodded. "Yeah." The man hesitated. Then he whispered, "You could help." Evan's eyes widened almost instantly. "No, no way." "I can't. The conductor doesn't have a choice," the technician said. "You can play the piece. I've heard you." Evan shook his head quickly. Playing alone in an empty hall is different. This is the whole orchestra. People watching. What if I mess it up? The technician put a hand on his shoulder. You won't. You know the music better than you think. Before Evan could answer, the conductor's frustrated voice filled the area again. Does anyone have any useful ideas? The technician looked toward him. I might. Evan's heart stopped. The conductor narrowed his eyes. Well, speak. There's someone here who can fill in on piano, the technician said calmly. The musicians all turned. More whispers spread through the room. Who? Do we have another pianist? I didn't know there was a backup. The technician stepped aside and motioned toward Evan. Him. The room fell completely silent. Evan felt every muscle in his body tighten. His heartbeat thudded loudly in his ears. One violinist scoffed. The cleaning guy? Another musician whispered, Is this a joke? The conductor stared at Evan with disbelief and irritation. You cannot be serious. I am, the technician said. He knows the piece. The conductor snorted. He knows how to sweep floors, not play piano. Evan lowered his eyes, embarrassed. I shouldn't. Wait, the technician interrupted. He can do it. I've heard him. The conductor crossed his arms. He touched the piano yesterday, even after I told him not to. And now you want me to trust him to play in front of my orchestra? Evan swallowed hard, feeling. Small. The technician met the conductor's glare. You don't have another choice. You said it yourself. The musicians looked at each other uncertainly. No one dared to speak. The conductor stood frozen, fighting between anger and desperation. Evan wanted to run. His chest felt tight, and his hands shook. He didn't want to embarrass himself or make a fool of this opportunity. He didn't want anyone to laugh. I can try, Evan said quietly, surprising even himself. Only if you want. The conductor looked at him long and hard. Then he exhaled sharply through his nose. Fine. Sit at the piano. Evan walked toward the grand piano slowly. Each step felt heavy. Words from yesterday echoed in his mind. Rogue guy. Don't touch my piano. Who gave you permission? But he kept walking. He sat on the bench. His hands hovered above the keys. The hall was full of people, now musicians holding instruments, the conductor watching closely, the technician standing near the side with quiet confidence. The conductor lifted his baton. Let's see what you can do, he said coldly. Evan took a breath, then another, and he began to play. The first few notes trembled slightly. His hands were nervous, and he could feel dozens of eyes staring at him. But he closed his eyes for just a second and forced himself to remember last night when the hall was empty. Calm and warm. His fingers steadied. The melody grew smoother. Tension in his shoulders eased. The conductor's baton slowly lowered. Not because he meant to, but because he was surprised. The musicians began to follow Evan's lead almost instinctively. Violins softened. Cellos deepened. The room filled with a harmony that felt like warm light. Evan played with emotion he didn't know he could show in front of others. He wasn't playing to impress anyone. He was playing because the music lived inside him. For the first time, the orchestra heard the piece the way it was meant to sound, and not one single person spoke. When he finished, the last note lingered in the air. Evan lifted his hands slowly, unsure if he should look up. Then he heard something he never expected. Silence. Not awkward silence, but stunned silence. The conductor stood there, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. The musicians looked shocked, some even amazed. Evan swallowed, waiting for someone to react. He braced for criticism, but no criticism came. For the first time since he started working there, the room wasn't laughing at him. It was listening. The next morning brought a different kind of silence to the old music hall. The doors were still locked, The stage lights still off, and the seats still empty, yet the place felt alive, as if something from the night before was still floating. In the air, it was the sound of the tune he had played, the one nobody expected, the one that shouldn't have happened. He arrived early again, holding his small cloth bag, the same one he always carried, since it was the only thing he owned that was still in good shape. His shoes were dusty, and his jacket had a broken zipper. But he carried himself with quiet calm, like a man who didn't see his worn-out things as something to be ashamed of. To him, they were simply part of his life. He pushed the heavy backstage door open and walked inside. The hall felt colder than usual. He stepped carefully, still unsure if someone would scold him again for going near the piano. After what happened last night, anything felt possible. He wasn't sure if the conductor remembered the moment clearly, or even believed it happened. He placed his bag down in the backstage corner and touched the wooden frame of the wall. He always did that. It was a habit he had, like greeting the building, thanking it for another day of shelter. He walked toward the stage, his feet moving slowly. Last night kept replaying in his mind the conductor shouting at him, the musicians staring, the sound of the piano waking up under his hands, and the feeling that for a few minutes he wasn't a cleaner anymore. He was simply a man playing, what lived inside his chest. But right after the last note, fear rushed back into him. He remembered the conductor's shocked expression, the whispers, the frozen silence from everyone present. He quickly closed the piano lid and stepped back. Unsure if he did something wrong, he didn't sleep much. His mind stayed awake, questioning everything. Had he embarrassed himself? Did they laugh at him after he left? Did he overstep his place? He knew this world didn't belong to him, and last night felt like crossing a line he had no right to cross. Still, something made him return early today. Something he couldn't explain. Maybe a small hope. Maybe he wanted to know what they thought. Or maybe he didn't want to hide. He swept the stage like he always did, quietly and slowly, pushing dust into a neat pile. But his eyes kept drifting to the piano. He wondered if he would ever touch it again. He knew it wasn't his, and he knew that touching it without permission was wrong. Yet the memory of its warm keys called out to him. While he worked, he didn't hear the footsteps approaching. From behind, the conductor, the same man who shouted at him the night before, stood at the back of the hall watching him. The conductor kept his arms crossed as he watched the young man sweep. His face wasn't angry, but it wasn't soft either. It was unreadable, which made the silence even heavier. Finally, the conductor stepped closer and spoke. "Stop for a moment." The broom handle paused mid-air. The young man turned slowly, unsure what expression he was supposed to wear. He kept his eyes low. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry if I—" The conductor raised a hand. "Don't apologize." Those words alone confused him more. He straightened up slightly, but didn't say anything. The conductor studied him for a long moment. "Last night? What you did?" He hesitated, as if the memory was still surprising to him. "Where did you learn to play like that?" He lowered his eyes again. "I just practiced when I could, sir." "Where?" "In different places," he answered softly. "Mostly old pianos no one used anymore." The conductor let out a breath, one that sounded like disbelief mixed with curiosity. He walked to the stage and tapped the side of the piano. "You played with your eyes closed," he said. "Why? I hear better that way." The conductor didn't answer immediately. He tapped the piano once more, thinking. Then he said, "Play again." The young man froze. I shouldn't, sir. I'm just here to clean." "This is not a request," the conductor said firmly. "Sit, play." The young man swallowed. His hands trembled slightly, not out of fear of the conductor, but out of fear of ruining what happened last night. What if it was just a moment? What if the piano didn't respond to him the same way today? Still, he walked toward the piano. His steps were small and nervous. He opened the lid gently, like opening a fragile memory. He sat down. The seat felt different today. Heavy. Important. He placed his hands on the keys, but did not press them yet. "Look at me," the conductor said. He lifted his eyes. "Don't close your eyes this time," the conductor ordered. "Show me you can play even when the world is watching." He nodded slowly, though inside he wasn't sure he could. He took a soft breath, let his fingers sink into the keys, and began to play Dot. It wasn't the same melody as last night. This one was gentler, softer, like a conversation instead of a storm. He didn't try to impress. He didn't try to prove anything. He simply played what he felt at that moment. His fingers moved carefully at first, but the music grew warmer, fuller. He didn't close his eyes. He didn't look away. He kept playing even when his heart started racing. When he finished, he lifted his hands slowly, afraid to look at the conductor's face. The hall stayed quiet. Then the conductor stepped forward. Again, something different. He obeyed. He played another piece, one he made up long ago, but never shared with anyone. It carried a mix of joy and sadness, like someone walking in the rain, but smiling. When he finished, the conductor's expression had changed. The hardness was gone. His eyes carried something thoughtful. "You're not just talented," the conductor said. "You have something rare." The young man didn't know how to respond. The conductor continued. "No one told you? No one noticed?" He shook his head gently. "Most people never listened long enough, sir." The conductor paced slowly in front of the stage. "Do you know how many students beg me for a chance? How many musicians dream of playing here? And here you are, a cleaner, playing like this." His face tightened slightly, not in anger, but in confusion, as if fate had played a trick on him. "You shouldn't be sweeping floors," the conductor said finally. The young man swallowed. "But sir, I need this job." "I'm not firing you," the conductor replied. "I'm trying to understand how someone like you ended up here, doing this." He didn't have an answer. His life wasn't full of big explanations. Things just happened, and he accepted them. The conductor let out a long breath and pointed to the piano. "Come back tomorrow morning. Earlier than today. I want to hear more." The young man blinked. "More?" "Yes," the conductor said. "If what I suspect is true, then we have work to do." He didn't fully understand what the conductor meant, but he nodded slowly. The conductor walked toward the exit, but stopped halfway. "And don't let anyone tell you your place is only behind a broom," he added softly before leaving. The young man stayed on the stage alone after that. He sat there, staring at the keys. His chest felt warm, but also heavy with new questions. He didn't know what this meant for his life. He didn't know if he should feel excited or scared. All he knew was that something had shifted. For years, people walked past him without noticing anything special. But now, someone finally looked closely. Someone finally listened. He pressed a single note on the piano, just one, and let the sound drift into the empty hall. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen. And for the first time ever, he wondered if his life might be more than survival. He closed the lid and stood up. He picked up his bag and broom. Everything looked the same around him, but inside, nothing felt the same. As he walked out of the hall, he didn't see the world differently. He saw himself differently, and that was enough to begin changing everything. The next few days moved quietly, but something inside him kept changing, even when nothing around him did. Every morning, he reached the music hall before the sun had risen completely. He would walk through the empty street with a feeling he couldn't explain. It wasn't excitement exactly, not fully. It was something softer, something like a warm echo inside his chest. The conductor was always there when he arrived now. That alone still felt unreal. The man who once shouted at him now waited for him. Not to clean, not to serve, but to sit in front of the piano dock, and each day the conductor would ask him to play. Sometimes he asked for something gentle. Sometimes something powerful. Sometimes he didn't ask at all. He simply pointed at the seat and let the music happen. The young man never protested. He just played. Because playing was easier than talking. Playing was the only time he felt completely himself. But even though the conductor no longer seemed angry, he still watched with sharp eyes. He paid attention to everything, the way the young man's fingers pressed the keys, how his breathing changed with the music, how he sat when he was unsure, how he relaxed when the melody began to flow. On the fourth morning, after the young man finished a soft piece he had created years ago, the conductor spoke. "You've been playing in the dark," he said, "with no teacher, no structure, no guidance. Do you know how rare it is for someone to reach this level without lessons?" The young man looked down, unsure what to say. The conductor continued, "You play with instinct. Pure instinct. But instinct alone isn't enough for the world outside this hall." The young man felt a pinch of panic in his chest. "Did I do something wrong today?" "No," the conductor said. "You did something right. And that's the problem." He didn't understand that the conductor walked toward the piano. "Talent like yours must be shaped. It must be trained. If you want to grow, if you want a chance to walk on a real stage, not like last week, but properly, then you need discipline. You need guidance." The word stage made the young man's stomach twist. He had never imagined himself standing there again. Not in front of a crowd. Not in the center of attention. He didn't know how to want things like that. "I don't know if I can. Or if I should," he whispered. The conductor sighed and sat on the edge of the stage. "Let me tell you something. People like you don't appear often. People with stories written inside their bones. People who carry pain and turn it into sound without even trying. You can't hide this. Not forever." The young man kept silent. The conductor added, "But I won't force you. I will only teach you if you want to learn." The hall grew quiet again. Later that morning, as the musicians arrived for rehearsal, he quietly stepped back into his cleaning work. No one knew what had been happening between him and the conductor. No one knew he was playing the same piano they practiced on. And today, they still walked past him without a glance. But a few noticed something different about the conductor, an odd patience. A strange calmness he did not usually carry. When rehearsal ended that day, one of the older musicians approached him while he swept the side aisle. "You've been here early every day," the older man said. "Yes, sir," the young man replied softly. "You work very hard." "Thank you, sir." The man nodded and walked away. A simple interaction, but even that felt new. People were starting to see he existed, even though the conductor told him he didn't have to clean during early hours. He still did. Cleaning gave him purpose, something steady, something simple. Music stirred too many emotions. Sweeping kept him grounded, but that night, something else stirred inside him too. He sat on the small bed in his tiny rented room, bare walls. A single bulb, no decoration except an old cup on the windowsill. He stayed awake long after the streets winked. Quiet. He thought about the conductors. Words. He thought about the moment he played with his eyes. Shut. He thought about the feeling of being treated as if he mattered. He wasn't used to wanting things. Life had taught him to survive, not to dream. But for the first time, he let himself imagine something small, a life where he didn't have to hide his music. A life where people listened. The next morning, he returned earlier than ever. The conductor stood inside the hall, leaning against the stage. "You came," the conductor said. The young man nodded. "I want to learn." There was no dramatic moment, No huge smile, no applause. Just a firm nod from the conductor. Sometimes the quietest decisions are the biggest ones. Good, the conductor said. Then we begin today. What followed in the next hour felt like a world he never imagined stepping into. The conductor began teaching him basic posture, how to sit with confidence, how to position his hands properly. He gently corrected small habits the young man never realized he had. You play beautifully, the conductor said, but beauty needs balance. Everything must support the sound, the body, the arms, the breath. He listened carefully, absorbing every detail. Then the conductor placed a sheet of printed music on the stand. The young man stared at it as if it were a puzzle. You can read music, correct? The conductor asked. He swallowed. Not really, sir. The conductor didn't look disappointed. He expected that. Then we start from the beginning. He spent the next hour learning the basics, notes, symbols, rhythm marks. His head began to ache from the effort. It was harder than he imagined. But when he finally managed to read a simple line and play it correctly, he lifted his eyes shyly. The conductor said nothing. He simply gave a small nod, the kind that said, "Good, keep going." And that alone made the young man's chest warm. As the week continued, the conductor's patience surprised even the orchestra members. They noticed how he arrived early every day now, something he hadn't done in years. They wondered why. One afternoon, after rehearsal ended, two younger musicians whispered among themselves, "Why is the conductor here so early these days?" "No idea. Maybe he's preparing something big. He looks different, more focused." The young man heard them from a distance, but he kept sweeping, pretending not to notice. If they ever found out the truth, that the conductor was training the cleaner, they wouldn't know what to do with that information. But secrets don't stay hidden forever, especially inside a large hall full of curious people. A few days later, something unexpected happened. The conductor didn't arrive early that morning. The young man waited on the stage bench for several minutes, staring at the quiet hall. He felt uneasy. The conductor had never been late since the training began. After almost half an hour, he heard hurried footsteps. The assistant manager entered, looking rushed. "Have you seen the conductor?" "No, sir," the young man replied. "Strange," the man said. "He's never late for rehearsals." Rehearsal began without him. The musicians practiced, confused but continuing because the schedule required it. Nearly an hour into rehearsal, the conductor finally walked in. His face was slightly pale. His steps were slower. The musicians straightened up and stopped playing. "Apologies," the conductor said, clearing his throat. "Continue." But even from a distance, the young man sensed something was off. The conductor didn't look like himself. During a break, when everyone stepped off the stage, the young man approached him quietly. "Are you all right, sir?" The conductor hesitated. He forced a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. Something was wrong. And soon. That something was going to change everything: his music lessons, the conductor's plans, and the path he had slowly started to believe in. Because life, just like music, has notes that come unexpectedly. Some are soft, some are heavy, and some change the entire song. The conductor's unusual silence stayed with him for the rest of the day. Even while he swept the hall and cleaned the backstage corners, his mind kept returning to that pale face and the forced smile. Something inside him whispered that the conductor was hiding pain, real pain, not the kind that could be brushed away with a short apology. But he didn't know what to do. He wasn't close enough to ask more questions, and he wasn't bold enough to insist. All he had was a quiet worry that sat like a stone inside his chest. That night, he walked home with slow steps. The air was cool, and the streetlights flickered weakly. He carried his bag close, as he always did, and tried to clear his thoughts. But the conductor's bent posture kept replaying in his mind. When he reached his small room, he lit the single bulb and sat on the edge of the bed. The floor creaked softly under his feet. He rested his hands on his knees and closed his eyes. Music drifted gently into his thoughts, soft, uncertain, like a melody searching for its next note. He wished he could help the conductor the same way the conductor had helped him. But reality rarely allowed him that kind of power. He was still the cleaner, still the one who swept the floors. And even though he was learning, even though things were changing, he didn't feel like someone who could change another person's burdens. The next morning, he arrived early again. He almost ran through the hall doors, afraid of what he might find. But the conductor was there, sitting on the edge of the stage, looking tired. But present, the young man let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "You're early," the conductor said. "So are you," he replied quietly. The conductor gave the same small, tired smile. "Shall we begin?" He nodded and hurried to the piano. But just as he placed his hands on the keys, the conductor raised a hand. "No playing today," he said softly. The young man froze. Did I do something wrong?" "Not at all," the conductor said. "I just want to talk." He slowly pulled his hands away from the keys and folded them in his lap. The conductor walked toward the piano and stood beside him. His face looked heavier than yesterday, as if he hadn't slept well. "There's something I need to tell you," the conductor said. "And you deserve to hear it from me, not from someone else." The young man felt a wave of fear, though he didn't know why. The conductor sat beside him on the bench. "My health isn't good," he said quietly. The young man's breath caught. "It's been going on for months," the conductor continued. "I tried ignoring it. I tried pretending I could keep going as usual. But yesterday, my body reminded me that I can't do that anymore." The young man looked at him with wide eyes, unable to speak. "I'll still teach you," the conductor said firmly. "I haven't given up, but I need you to understand something. I won't be able to guide you forever." His heart sank. He wanted to protest, to say that the conductor would get better, that everything would be fine. But he wasn't a child. He knew the truth when he heard it. The conductor continued, "You have something rare, and I don't want my time running out before you discover what you're capable of." The young man bowed his head. "Sir, I don't want to lose you." The conductor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're not losing me. Not now. I'm still here. We still have time. But I need you to promise me something." He lifted his eyes. "Promise me you'll keep playing, even if I'm not standing beside you." A long silence filled the hall. Finally, he nodded. "I promise." The conductor's expression softened. "Good. Then let's make the most of the time we have." And they did. For the next several weeks, the hall became a world for the two of them alone. Every morning, before the orchestra arrived, they sat together at the piano. The conductor taught him everything he could posture: breath control, musical reading, interpretation. He corrected gently, explained thoughtfully, and encouraged quietly. And the young man absorbed it all. Some days, the conductor looked strong, speaking with confidence. Other days, he looked tired, pausing often, gripping the edge of the piano for balance. But he never stopped teaching, and the young man never stopped learning. One morning, after a particularly long lesson, the conductor sighed heavily. "You're ready," he said. The young man blinked. "Ready for what, sir?" "For them," the conductor said, motioning toward the empty seats. "Ready for the world to hear you. Ready to step out from the shadows." The young man shook his head quickly. "No, sir, I can't." "You can," the conductor interrupted. "You just don't believe it yet." He stood up slowly and walked to the center of the stage. "Come here," he said. The young man hesitated, then walked to the middle. The conductor looked out at the empty hall. "One day soon?" People will fill these seats. They'll listen. They'll watch you. And they'll know what I already know. The young man swallowed. But you are not just anything, the conductor said firmly. Not anymore. He lowered his gaze. I'm afraid. The conductor nodded. Good, that means you're human. He didn't know what to do with those words. They felt heavy but strangely comforting. Late that same afternoon, something unexpected happened. The hall manager called the conductor into his office. The young man continued cleaning the stage steps until he heard raised voices sharp enough to make him stop sweeping. He tried not to listen, but the words carried. He's a cleaner, the manager exclaimed. You can't bring him into rehearsals. You can't train him like one of your students. It's not appropriate. He is a musician, the conductor replied, voice steady but strained. He's not part of the program. He has no background, no paperwork, no training. He has talent. That's not enough. It's more than enough. People are talking, the manager said. They think you've lost focus. They think something's wrong with you. The conductor didn't answer for a long moment. Finally, he said, Let them talk. The manager's tone hardened. If you keep pushing this, the board will step in. A painful silence followed. The young man stepped away quickly, pretending he hadn't heard anything. His heart beat hard against his ribs. He didn't want to cause trouble. He didn't want the conductor to fight for him. But deep inside, a tiny voice whispered, Someone is fighting for you. The next morning, the conductor looked more tired than ever. But he greeted the young man with a determined smile. We continue. He said dot, so they continued. But by the end of the week, everything changed. The conductor collapsed backstage. The musicians panicked. The assistant manager called for help. The young man was the first to reach him. He knelt beside the conductor, holding his hand, feeling fear rise through every part of him. The conductor looked up at him with weak eyes. Don't stop playing, he whispered. Those were the last words he said before he was taken away. The hall fell silent for days. The young man didn't play. He couldn't. He felt lost, like a piece of himself had been taken away. But one evening, after everyone had left, he walked slowly toward the piano. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. He sat down. He closed his eyes, and he played. He played the melody the conductor loved. He played the tune he first created years ago. He played everything he remembered and everything he felt. Tears fell. But his fingers didn't stop. When he finished, he opened his eyes. The hall was empty, but he didn't feel alone. The next morning, the assistant manager approached him. We heard you last night, he said. A few musicians stayed late. They listened from backstage. The young man froze. The manager continued, They want you to perform at the season opening concert. As a tribute. For him. His breath caught. For the conductor? The manager nodded. He believed in you. And now, we all want to see what he saw. The young man looked toward the piano. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded. On the night of the concert, the hall was filled. Every seat taken. The lights dimmed. The air felt thick with expectation. He walked onto the stage with slow steps. His hands shook. His heart pounded. But when he reached the piano, he saw something on the bench. A small conductor's baton. He knew who had left it. There, he sat down. He closed his eyes, and he played. He played not as a cleaner, not as a student, not as someone who hid in the shadows. He played as someone who had been seen, someone who had been believed in. The music rose through the hall like light, soft, strong, alive. And for the first time, he understood what the conductor had tried so hard to show him. He wasn't playing to be accepted. He was playing because the music belonged to him. When the final note faded, The hall stayed quiet for a long, breathless second. Then the applause rose out loud. Endless thought he lifted his head slowly, and for the first time, he didn't look away. He looked forward, because the story that had once begun in the shadows had finally stepped into the light. He stood behind the curtain for a long moment, breathing slowly as the noise of the hall faded into a soft hum. When the final announcement ended and the applause rolled over the room like a quiet wave, he stepped out from the shadows. There was no panic in his walk this time, no shaking hands, no doubt pulling at his chest. Instead, he moved with calm steps, almost as if something had shifted deep inside him. People looked at him with surprise. The sane whispers returned, but the tone felt different now. He had seen these faces earlier, seen how they doubted him and judged him. But standing under the warm lights now, he felt none of that weight. Not after everything that had happened backstage. Not after finally playing in front of the one person who had carried his dreams. Long before he learned to carry them himself, his mother was seated in the 4th row, close,